The opening, What Happens in the 40 Days After Death. Ancient Egyptian Secrets. Welcome back to our channel, Seekers of Ancient Wisdom and Hidden Knowledge. I'm here with what might be the most important video you'll ever watch about death, consciousness, and what the ancient Egyptians knew that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. If you've ever wondered what really happens when we die, if consciousness truly survives beyond the physical body, or why every major spiritual tradition speaks of a 40-day period after death, then this video will change everything you thought you knew about the greatest mystery of human existence. Today we're diving into the forbidden knowledge that was once reserved only for pharaohs and high priests, encoded in papyrus scrolls and carved into pyramid walls, deliberately hidden from common people for thousands of years. These aren't just ancient beliefs or primitive superstitions. These are sophisticated consciousness technologies that describe a precise, systematic process that every human soul undergoes during the 40 days following physical death. The ancient Egyptians didn't just believe in life after death. They had detailed maps, specific instructions, and practical techniques for navigating what they called the duat, the intermediate realm between physical life and whatever comes next. They understood death not as an ending, but as the most important exam of your entire existence, a 40-day graduation process that determines the future of your consciousness. What I'm about to share with you comes from years of studying original hieroglyphic texts, consulting with Egyptologists who've discovered papyrus scrolls that mainstream academia prefers to ignore, and connecting these ancient insights with cutting-edge research in consciousness studies and near-death experience science. We'll explore why the number 40 appears in every spiritual tradition, from Christianity to Buddhism to Islam, what the 9 components of the human soul actually are, according to Egyptian teaching, and most importantly, how you can use this knowledge right now while you're still alive to prepare for the most significant journey any of us will ever take. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Egyptians spent their entire civilization perfecting the science of death, why this knowledge was systematically suppressed by later cultures, and how these ancient secrets can transform your relationship with mortality and give you practical tools for supporting loved ones through their own transitions. This isn't just historical curiosity. This is essential knowledge for every conscious human being, because whether we acknowledge it or not, we're all heading toward the same ultimate experience. The only question is whether we'll be prepared for what awaits us in those crucial 40 days that determine everything that follows. So make sure you're somewhere you can focus completely, because we're about to unlock secrets that the pharaohs took to their tombs, hidden knowledge that could revolutionize how humanity understands consciousness, death, and the true nature of human existence itself. Part 1. The Revelations of Ancient Papyrus Scrolls. What I'm about to reveal to you has been hidden in museum vaults and private collections for over a century, deliberately mistranslated by academic institutions that couldn't accept the implications of what these ancient texts actually describe. The Egyptian knowledge of death and consciousness wasn't primitive mythology as we've been told. It was the most sophisticated understanding of human consciousness and post-mortem survival that has ever existed on this planet. The story begins in 1888 when E.A. Wallace Budge, working for the British Museum, acquired what would become known as the Papyrus of Ani, the most complete and detailed version of what Egyptologists call the Book of the Dead. But here's what they don't tell you in museums or university courses. The Book of the Dead isn't actually a book, and it's not really about death in the way we understand it. The Egyptian title was Pert Emhru, which translates to coming forth by day, or emerging into light. This wasn't a collection of funeral prayers or primitive death mythology. These were precise technical manuals, step-by-step instructions for consciousness navigation during the 40-day transition period that follows physical death. Think of them as the world's first and most sophisticated user's manual for human consciousness operating outside the physical body. The Papyrus of Ani contains over 190 individual chapters, each one a specific technique or formula for dealing with particular challenges that consciousness encounters during its post-mortem journey. These weren't written by priests making up stories about gods and monsters. They were compiled by individuals who had undergone these experiences themselves, either through near-death encounters or through the advanced consciousness projection techniques that were taught in Egyptian mystery schools. But the Papyrus of Ani is just one document in a vast library of consciousness research that the Egyptians accumulated over 3,000 years. The pyramid texts, carved into the burial chambers of Old Kingdom pharaohs, contain even more advanced information that was considered too dangerous for anyone except divinely appointed rulers. These texts describe consciousness technologies that allowed pharaohs to maintain continuous awareness through the death transition and achieve what they called Ak status, becoming luminous beings who could operate consciously in both physical and non-physical dimensions. The coffin texts found in Middle Kingdom burials represent the democratization of this royal knowledge, adapted for nobles and wealthy individuals who wanted access to the same consciousness preservation techniques that had previously been reserved for pharaohs. By the New Kingdom period, simplified versions of these instructions were being included in the burials of ordinary citizens, suggesting that Egyptian civilization had developed practical methods for training large numbers of people in advanced consciousness techniques. What makes these documents extraordinary isn't just their age or their detailed descriptions of post-mortem experiences. It's the consistency and precision with which they describe specific phenomena that modern consciousness researchers are only beginning to understand. When you compare Egyptian accounts of the 40-day death process with contemporary near-death experience research, out-of-body experience studies, and even advanced meditation literature, the correlations are unmistakable and scientifically significant. The Egyptians describe consciousness as operating through multiple interconnected energy bodies that separate from the physical form in a specific sequence during death. Modern research into the electromagnetic properties of living tissue, the quantum field effects generated by neural networks, and the measurable energy changes that occur during death are confirming that consciousness does indeed operate through multiple energetic systems that can maintain coherence independent of physical brain activity. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The academic establishment has systematically mistranslated and misinterpreted these texts for over 150 years, presenting them as primitive religious beliefs rather than sophisticated consciousness science. This wasn't accidental ignorance. It was deliberate suppression of knowledge that would fundamentally challenge the materialistic worldview that dominates modern institutions. Consider the work of Gerald Massey, a 19th century scholar who spent decades studying Egyptian texts and identified over 200 parallels between Egyptian spiritual concepts and later Christian doctrines. His research demonstrated that many supposedly original Christian ideas about resurrection, judgment after death, and consciousness survival were actually derived from much older Egyptian sources. Despite producing over 6,000 pages of documented evidence, Massey's work was systematically excluded from academic curricula and dismissed by establishment scholars. The same pattern of suppression occurred with the research of E. A. Wallace Budge himself, despite his position as keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities at the British Museum. When Budge published translations that suggested the Egyptians possessed advanced knowledge of consciousness and energy manipulation, his academic colleagues accused him of being too literal in his interpretations and encouraged more symbolic readings that reduced profound technical instructions to mere poetic metaphors. This institutional bias against taking Egyptian consciousness science seriously continues today. Archaeological discoveries that reveal sophisticated understanding of acoustics, electromagnetic fields, and consciousness-altering technologies in Egyptian temples and pyramids are consistently explained away as coincidences or given purely mundane interpretations that ignore their obvious consciousness-related applications. The 40-day period that forms the central focus of Egyptian death science appears in spiritual traditions throughout the world. Yet academic comparative religion courses rarely acknowledge this universal pattern or investigate what it might indicate about actual post-mortem processes. In Christianity, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness and 40 days between resurrection and ascension. In Islam, the soul is said to linger near the body for 40 days after death. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo Thodol describes a 49-day intermediate state between death and rebirth. In Jewish tradition, the soul undergoes purification for 40 days after death. This consistency across cultures that had no historical contact with each other suggests that the 40-day period represents actual phenomenological reality rather than cultural coincidence. The Egyptians were simply the most systematic in documenting and developing practical techniques for navigating this universal human experience. The astronomical significance of the 40-day period provides additional evidence for its objective reality. 40 days corresponds precisely to the heliacal rising cycle of Sirius, the star that the Egyptians associated with Isis and considered the most important celestial marker for consciousness transition. Modern astronomy has confirmed that Sirius is actually a binary star system with unusual electromagnetic properties that the Egyptians somehow knew about thousands of years before we had telescopes capable of detecting them. Recent research in chronobiology has also identified 40-day cycles in human cellular regeneration, brainwave pattern changes, and hormonal fluctuations that suggest our biological systems are naturally attuned to this time period. The 40 days may represent an optimal window for consciousness reorganization that the Egyptians discovered through empirical observation and systematic experimentation. The papyrus scrolls describe the 40-day period as consisting of specific phases, each with distinct characteristics and challenges that consciousness must navigate successfully to achieve optimal post-mortem outcomes. The first phase, lasting approximately 7 days, involves the gradual separation of what the Egyptians called the Ka, energy double, from the Khat, physical body. During this period, consciousness remains closely connected to the physical form and may experience confusion about its changed state. The second phase, lasting approximately 14 days, involves consciousness learning to operate through the Ba, soul body, and beginning its journey through what the texts call the Duat, or intermediate realm. This phase corresponds remarkably closely to what modern near-death experiencers describe as the life review process, where consciousness encounters comprehensive awareness of all actions, thoughts, and intentions from the recently completed lifetime. The third phase, lasting approximately 14 days, involves encountering what the Egyptians called the 42 judges, divine principles that evaluate different aspects of the soul's development and preparation for continued evolution. This phase culminates in the famous weighing of the heart ceremony, where the heart, representing the integrated consciousness of the individual, is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, representing cosmic order and truth. The final phase, lasting approximately 5 days, involves either the achievement of Akh status, luminous consciousness capable of continued evolution, or what the texts euphemistically describe as being devoured by Emet, a process that appears to involve the dissolution of individual consciousness back into undifferentiated cosmic awareness. These phases aren't described as symbolic or metaphorical processes. The papyrus text provides specific techniques for maintaining awareness during each phase, detailed descriptions of the environments and entities that consciousness encounters, and practical methods for successfully navigating the challenges that arise. The level of technical detail suggests these descriptions were based on extensive empirical research rather than theological speculation. The Ren Papyrus, discovered in 1858 but not properly translated until the 20th century, contains mathematical formulas that appear to be calculations for consciousness projection beyond the physical body. These mathematical relationships correspond to frequency ratios that modern audio engineers recognize as producing specific altered states of consciousness when generated through sound technology. The Ebers Papyrus, famous for its medical knowledge, also contains sections describing the electromagnetic properties of different parts of the human body and their relationship to consciousness function. These descriptions anticipate modern discoveries about the role of electromagnetic fields in neural processing and the measurable energy changes that occur during various states of consciousness. Perhaps most significantly, recently discovered papyrus fragments from the Tuna El Gebel site describe training programs that Egyptian priests used to prepare individuals for conscious death experiences. These programs involve systematic development of out-of-body projection abilities, practice with maintaining awareness during various altered states of consciousness, and specific preparation techniques for encountering the challenges described in the postmortem texts. The training programs described in these fragments correlate remarkably closely with advanced meditation techniques found in Tibetan Buddhism, Hindu yoga, and other consciousness development traditions. This suggests that ancient Egyptian mystery schools may have been the original source for many advanced consciousness techniques that later spread throughout the world through trade routes and cultural exchange. Archaeological evidence supports this possibility. Excavations at sites like Dendera, Edfu, and Philae have revealed temple complexes with acoustic properties specifically designed to induce altered states of consciousness. These temples contain chambers with resonance frequencies that correspond to specific brainwave patterns associated with out-of-body experiences, deep meditative states, and enhanced psychic perception. The Great Pyramid itself demonstrates engineering knowledge that seems impossible for the time period, including precise astronomical alignments, acoustic properties that amplify certain frequencies while dampening others, and electromagnetic anomalies that modern engineers can measure but not fully explain. The internal chamber system appears designed not just for burial, but for consciousness projection and transformation experiences. Chemical analysis of substances found in Egyptian canopic jars and mummy wrappings has revealed complex organic compounds that affect neurotransmitter function and consciousness states. These weren't just preservation chemicals, but sophisticated psychoactive preparations that could facilitate the consciousness separation processes described in the papyrus texts. The suppression of this evidence and the systematic misinterpretation of Egyptian consciousness science represents one of the greatest intellectual tragedies in human history. We've lost access to advanced understanding of consciousness, death, and human potential that could revolutionize medicine, psychology, and our entire approach to human development and end-of-life care. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If the Egyptian descriptions of post-mortem consciousness survival are accurate, then our entire materialistic worldview requires fundamental revision. If consciousness can maintain coherence and continue evolving after physical death, then human life has purposes and potentials that mainstream culture completely ignores. The 40-day period described in Egyptian texts isn't just ancient history, it's a process that every human being will experience, regardless of their beliefs or cultural background. The only question is whether we'll approach this transition with the knowledge and preparation that the Egyptians considered essential, or whether we'll enter it blindly and unprepared like most people in modern culture. The Egyptian papyrus scrolls offer us a roadmap for the most important journey any of us will ever take. They provide practical techniques for maintaining consciousness coherence during the death transition, specific preparation methods we can use while still alive, and detailed information about what to expect during each phase of the 40-day process. But accessing this knowledge requires overcoming over a century of academic conditioning that has trained us to dismiss Egyptian consciousness science as primitive superstition. We need to approach these texts with the same scientific rigor that we bring to any other technical manual, testing their claims through direct experience and empirical investigation, rather than simply accepting or rejecting them based on cultural prejudices. The Egyptians spent over 3,000 years perfecting their understanding of consciousness and death. They developed the most sophisticated civilization in human history, created architectural and artistic achievements that we still can't fully replicate, and maintained cultural continuity longer than any other society. Their knowledge of consciousness deserves the same serious consideration that we give to their achievements in mathematics, engineering, and medicine. In the following sections, we'll explore exactly what the Egyptian texts tell us about the structure of human consciousness, the specific challenges encountered during the 40-day transition period, and the practical techniques they developed for successfully navigating this ultimate human experience. We'll also examine how this ancient knowledge correlates with modern consciousness research and what it means for how we understand life, death, and human potential. The revelations contained in these ancient papyrus scrolls could transform human civilization just as profoundly as the discovery of electricity or the development of computers. The only question is whether we're ready to accept knowledge that challenges everything we've been taught about the nature of consciousness and reality itself. Part 2. The structure of the soul according to ancient Egypt. The most revolutionary aspect of Egyptian consciousness science was their understanding that human beings don't possess a single, unified soul, but rather operate through 9 distinct but interconnected aspects of consciousness, each with specific functions and characteristics that become critically important during the death transition. This sophisticated model of human consciousness was developed over thousands of years of systematic observation and experimentation, and it provides the foundation for understanding how awareness can maintain coherence and continue evolving after physical death. Modern psychology recognizes multiple aspects of consciousness: the conscious mind, unconscious mind, ego, shadow, anima, animus. But these are typically understood as different functions of a single awareness operating through the brain. The Egyptian model is fundamentally different. They understood these 9 aspects as distinct energy systems that interpenetrate and coordinate with each other during physical life, but can separate and operate independently under certain conditions, particularly during death. The first and most familiar aspect is the Khat, the physical body that serves as the vehicle for consciousness during earthly existence. The Egyptians understood the Khat not as a mere collection of biological tissues, but as a sophisticated energy transduction system that allows non-physical consciousness to interact with the physical dimension. They recognized that the Khat contains specific energy centers and pathways that correspond to what other traditions call chakras and meridians, and they developed detailed knowledge of how these energy systems function and how they can be optimized for consciousness development. The elaborate mummification procedures that the Egyptians perfected weren't just about physical preservation. They were sophisticated techniques for maintaining the energetic integrity of the Khat so that it could continue serving as an anchor point for consciousness during the 40-day transition period. The specific chemicals, wrapping procedures, and positioning protocols used in mummification were designed to preserve not just the physical tissues, but the electromagnetic field patterns that the Khat generates during life. Modern research into the electromagnetic properties of living tissue has confirmed that biological systems do indeed generate measurable energy fields that extend beyond the physical boundaries of the body. These bioelectric fields appear to carry information about the organism's state and may serve as interfaces between consciousness and physical matter. The Egyptian mummification process seems to have been designed to preserve these field patterns long enough for consciousness to complete its transition to operating through other energy systems. The second aspect is the Ka, which the Egyptians described as the energy double or etheric body that precisely duplicates the physical form but exists at a higher vibrational frequency. The Ka is formed during physical life through the interaction between consciousness and the Khat, and it serves as an intermediate energy system that allows consciousness to begin separating from dense physical matter while maintaining a familiar structural framework. During the initial phase of the death transition, consciousness transfers its primary identification from the Khat to the Ka, which explains why many near-death experiencers report looking down at their physical body from a position slightly above it while still feeling embodied in a form that appears identical to their physical body. The Ka provides continuity of identity and sensory experience during the early stages of consciousness separation. The Egyptian text describes specific techniques for strengthening and developing the Ka during physical life, including visualization exercises, energy cultivation practices, and what would today be called astral projection or out-of-body experience training. These practices allow individuals to become familiar with operating through the Ka while still alive, making the death transition less disorienting and more conscious. Archaeological evidence suggests that Egyptian mystery schools included systematic training in Ka development and projection. Temple complexes at sites like Dendera and Edfu contain chambers with acoustic and electromagnetic properties specifically designed to facilitate out-of-body experiences and Ka projection. Students would practice separating their consciousness from the physical body and learning to navigate through the Kai, developing skills that would prove essential during the death transition. The third aspect is the Bia, often translated as the soul, but more accurately understood as the vehicle for individual consciousness and personality. The Bia is typically depicted in Egyptian art as a human-headed bird, symbolizing its ability to move freely between different dimensions of reality while maintaining individual identity and awareness. The Bee represents the core essence of who you are as a unique conscious being, carrying your memories, personality traits, learned abilities, and accumulated wisdom. During the death transition, consciousness gradually shifts from operating primarily through the Kai to operating through the Bia, which provides much greater freedom of movement and perception, but requires learning entirely new modes of navigation and interaction. The BA can travel instantly to any location through intention alone, can perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, and can access information that was unavailable to consciousness while operating through physical and etheric systems. The development of BA consciousness represents one of the primary goals of Egyptian spiritual training. Advanced practitioners learn to transfer their awareness to the Bai while still alive, gaining access to expanded perception and capabilities that allow them to gather information, influence events, and interact with non-physical entities and dimensions. This training was considered essential preparation for successful navigation of the post-mortem journey. The fourth aspect is the Akh, representing consciousness that has achieved luminous or enlightened status through successful integration of all 9 aspects into a unified transcendent awareness. The Akh is depicted as a radiant being that can operate consciously in both physical and non-physical dimensions without losing coherence or individual identity. Achieving Akh status was considered the ultimate goal of Egyptian spiritual development and the optimal outcome of the death transition process. The Egyptian texts describe the Akh as possessing capabilities that seem supernatural from ordinary perspectives. The ability to manifest in physical form at will, to access any information throughout space and time, to influence events through direct mental intention, and to serve as a guide and teacher for other consciousness entities still developing through lower aspects. The Akh represents what consciousness can become when it fully realizes its creative potential and learns to operate according to cosmic principles rather than being limited by identification with temporary vehicles. The fifth aspect is the Ren, the true name or vibrational signature that represents the unique frequency pattern of individual consciousness. The Egyptians understood that every conscious being has a specific energetic signature that distinguishes it from all other consciousness entities, somewhat like a cosmic fingerprint or DNA pattern that persists through all transformations and evolutionary stages. The Ren is more than just a name in the conventional sense. It represents the fundamental vibrational pattern that consciousness uses to maintain coherence and continuity across different levels of existence. Knowing and being able to pronounce your true Ren was considered essential for maintaining identity coherence during the death transition and for establishing your credentials when encountering other consciousness entities in non-physical dimensions. The Egyptian practice of preserving names through hieroglyphic inscriptions wasn't just about historical record-keeping. They understood that the correct pronunciation and written representation of the Ren helps anchor consciousness patterns and provides a focal point for identity coherence during periods of major transition. The elaborate name preservation procedures found in Egyptian tombs were practical techniques for supporting consciousness stability during the 40-day journey. The sixth aspect is the Ib, the heart that serves as the center of consciousness integration and the seat of wisdom, emotion, and moral development. The Egyptians understood the heart not as merely a physical organ, but as the primary interface between individual consciousness and cosmic intelligence. The heart was considered the most important aspect of consciousness for determining postmortem outcomes, which is why it was carefully preserved during mummification while the brain was discarded. Modern research into heart-brain interactions has confirmed that the heart contains its own neural network with over 40,000 neurons that can operate independently of the brain and that generate the strongest electromagnetic field in the human body. The heart's electromagnetic field is measurable up to 8 feet away from the body and appears to carry information about emotional and consciousness states that can influence other people and environmental conditions. The Egyptian emphasis on heart consciousness anticipated these discoveries by thousands of years. They developed sophisticated techniques for heart-centered awareness that allow consciousness to access intuitive wisdom, emotional intelligence, and direct connection with cosmic intelligence patterns. The famous weighing of the heart ceremony that occurs during the death transition represents an evaluation of how well consciousness has developed these heart-centered capabilities. The seventh aspect is the shoot, the shadow that represents the interface between consciousness and the unconscious patterns, karmic imprints, and evolutionary programs that influence behavior and development. The shoot contains all the unresolved issues, suppressed emotions, and unconscious motivations that consciousness has accumulated during its evolutionary journey. During the death transition, consciousness must confront and integrate the contents of the shiot in order to achieve the coherence necessary for continued evolution. This confrontation appears in the Egyptian texts as encounters with various challenging entities and situations that test consciousness's ability to maintain awareness and compassion when faced with its own shadows and limitations. The Egyptian understanding of shadow work anticipated modern psychological insights about the importance of integrating unconscious content for healthy development. Their techniques for working with the Shi'ud included dream work, visualization practices, and what would today be called shadow integration exercises that help consciousness recognize and transform unconscious patterns rather than being controlled by them. The eighth aspect is the sachem, the power or vital force that enables consciousness to affect changes in both physical and non-physical dimensions. The sachem represents the dynamic, creative aspect of consciousness that can influence matter, energy, and other consciousness entities through focused intention and aligned action. The development of sachem was considered essential for advanced Egyptian practitioners because it provides the power necessary for effective navigation of post-mortem challenges and opportunities. Without sufficient sachem development, consciousness may lack the energy and capability needed to maintain coherence during the death transition or to successfully complete the various tests and transformations described in the Egyptian texts. The sachem is cultivated through practices that develop personal power, energetic sensitivity, and the ability to direct consciousness energy toward specific outcomes. These practices included breathwork, energy cultivation exercises, ritual magic, and various forms of consciousness training that build the energetic capacity needed for advanced consciousness operations. The ninth aspect is the Sahu, the spiritual body that represents the ultimate vehicle for consciousness evolution and the means by which awakened consciousness can continue developing through increasingly refined dimensions of existence. The Sahu is formed through the successful integration of all 8 other aspects into a unified, transcendent awareness that maintains individual identity while operating according to cosmic principles. The Sahu represents what consciousness becomes when it successfully completes the death transition and achieves the integration necessary for continued evolution beyond physical existence. It possesses all the capabilities of the other aspects, but operates at a level of sophistication and power that allows direct participation in cosmic creative processes. The Egyptian understanding of these 9 aspects provides a comprehensive map of human consciousness potential that extends far beyond what mainstream psychology recognizes. Each aspect represents specific capabilities and challenges that become crucial during the death transition, and the successful navigation of the 40-day journey depends on understanding how these aspects separate, transform, and potentially reintegrate during the consciousness evolution process. The separation process begins immediately upon physical death as consciousness gradually withdraws its identification from the Ka and begins operating through the Ka. This initial transition typically takes 3 to 7 days and corresponds to what many cultures recognize as the period when the soul lingers near the body before beginning its journey to other dimensions. During this initial phase, consciousness often experiences confusion and disorientation as it adapts to operating through the Ka rather than the familiar physical body. The Ka provides similar sensory experiences to physical embodiment, but operates according to different laws and principles that consciousness must learn to navigate. Many near-death experiencers report exactly this type of initial confusion, followed by gradual adaptation to new modes of perception and movement. The Egyptian texts provide specific guidance for consciousness during this initial transition phase, including techniques for maintaining awareness, methods for testing the reality of Ka experiences versus hallucinations or projections, and procedures for beginning the journey toward the intermediate dimensions where the main death transition work takes place. The second phase involves consciousness learning to operate through the Bia, which provides much greater freedom and capability, but requires abandoning the familiar human form identification that the Ka maintains. This transition typically occurs between the 7th and 14th days after death and represents one of the most challenging aspects of the entire journey. Operating through the Bia requires consciousness to maintain coherence and identity without the structural support provided by form-based vehicles. The Bia can assume any appearance or no appearance at all, can travel instantly to any location through intention alone, and can perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. Learning to navigate these expanded capabilities without losing coherence or direction requires considerable preparation and development. The Egyptian text describes specific challenges that consciousness encounters during the Ba transition phase, including encounters with entities that may attempt to confuse or misdirect consciousness, tests of identity coherence when form-based reference points are removed, and the need to maintain ethical alignment when presented with expanded power and capability. The third phase involves the integration of developed capabilities from all 9 aspects into the unified awareness that the Egyptians called Akh consciousness. This integration process typically occurs between the 14th and 35th days after death and represents the core work of the entire transition journey. The integration process involves consciousness demonstrating its development through encounters with what the Egyptian texts call the 42 judges, each representing a different aspect of cosmic law and evolutionary principle. These encounters test consciousness's understanding of cosmic principles, its ethical development, its emotional maturity, and its readiness for continued evolution at higher levels of existence. The famous weighing of the heart ceremony occurs during this integration phase and represents a comprehensive evaluation of consciousness's overall development and readiness for continued evolution. The heart, representing integrated consciousness, must be lighter than the feather of Ma'at, representing cosmic order and truth. This means that consciousness must have resolved its major karmic issues, integrated its shadow material, and achieved sufficient development to operate according to cosmic principles rather than being driven by unconscious patterns or selfish motivations. The final phase involves either the achievement of Akh status and continued evolution, or what the Egyptian texts describe as dissolution back into undifferentiated cosmic awareness. This phase typically occurs between the 35th and 40th days after death and represents the culmination of the entire transition process. Consciousness that successfully achieves Akh status gains access to capabilities and dimensions of existence that are difficult to describe from ordinary perspectives. The Akh can operate consciously in both physical and non-physical dimensions, can access information throughout space and time, can influence events through direct mental intention, and can serve as a guide and teacher for other consciousness entities still developing through lower phases. Consciousness that doesn't achieve sufficient integration may undergo what the Egyptian texts describe as being devoured by Ammit, a process that appears to involve the dissolution of individual identity back into cosmic consciousness. This isn't described as punishment, but rather as a natural consequence of insufficient development, somewhat like a student who isn't ready for advanced courses returning to foundational studies. The Egyptian understanding of consciousness structure and development provides practical guidance for anyone interested in preparing for the death transition while still alive. By understanding the 9 aspects and their functions, individuals can begin developing the capabilities and integration that will prove essential during the 40-day journey. The most important preparation involves learning to operate consciously through the Ka and Ba while still alive, developing heart-centered awareness, integrating shadow material, cultivating personal power, and achieving sufficient ethical development to navigate expanded capabilities wisely. These preparations aren't just theoretical study, but practical development work that enhances life quality while providing essential preparation for the ultimate journey that every consciousness will eventually undertake. The Egyptian map of consciousness structure reveals human potential that extends far beyond what mainstream culture recognizes. We aren't just biological machines with temporary awareness, but complex consciousness entities with multiple vehicles for development and evolution that can continue growing and contributing long after physical death. Understanding this potential changes everything about how we approach life, death, and human development itself. Part 3. Walking the Path of Amenta, the Underworld Journey. The Egyptian concept of Amenta, often mistranslated as simply the underworld, represents one of the most sophisticated maps of post-mortem consciousness navigation ever developed by human civilization. Amenta isn't a physical location, but rather a series of consciousness states and dimensional transitions that every soul must navigate during the 40-day period following physical death. The word itself means the hidden land, or that which is concealed, referring to dimensions of reality that remain invisible to ordinary physical perception, but become directly accessible to consciousness operating through its Bia and Ak vehicles. The journey through Amenta is described in the Egyptian texts as passage through 12 gates or pylons, each representing a specific phase of consciousness transformation, and each guarded by entities that test the soul's development and readiness to proceed. These aren't arbitrary obstacles created by capricious gods, but natural checkpoints in the consciousness evolution process that ensure individuals don't advance to levels of existence for which they lack adequate preparation. Modern near-death experience research has identified remarkably similar phases in contemporary accounts of postmortem consciousness, suggesting that the Egyptian mapping of Amenta describes universal stages of consciousness transition rather than culture-specific religious beliefs. The consistency between ancient Egyptian descriptions and modern experiential accounts provides compelling evidence that these texts document actual phenomenological territory rather than mythological speculation. The first three gates of Amenta correspond to what the Egyptians called the phase of confusion, typically lasting from the moment of death through approximately the 10th day of the transition period. During this phase, consciousness is learning to operate outside the physical body while still maintaining strong identification with human form existence and earthly concerns. The first gate is encountered immediately upon death as consciousness begins to separate from the physical body. The Egyptian texts describe this gate as being guarded by entities whose function is to determine whether consciousness is actually deceased or merely undergoing a temporary separation experience. Many individuals who have clinically died and been resuscitated report encountering beings who seem to be evaluating whether it's time for them to proceed with the death transition or return to physical life. The guardian entities at the first gate test consciousness's understanding of its changed state and its willingness to release attachment to physical existence. Consciousness that remains strongly identified with the physical body or refuses to accept the reality of death may become confused or disoriented, experiencing what some texts describe as wandering in circles or being unable to find the path forward. The Egyptian instruction manuals provide specific techniques for successfully navigating the first gate, including declarations of understanding about the nature of death, requests for guidance from protective entities, and methods for maintaining awareness and orientation during the initial confusion that typically accompanies consciousness separation from the physical form. The second gate tests consciousness's ability to distinguish between authentic spiritual experiences and projections or hallucinations created by its own unconscious patterns. During the early phases of death transition, consciousness often encounters experiences that seem familiar and comforting, but may actually be manifestations of its own expectations, desires, or fears rather than objective reality. The guardians of the second gate challenge consciousness to demonstrate discrimination between authentic guidance and self-created illusions. This gate corresponds to what many near-death researchers have identified as a crucial phase where individuals must learn to distinguish between meaningful encounters with deceased relatives or spiritual guides and experiences that are generated by their own psychological patterns. The Egyptian texts provide detailed criteria for recognizing authentic spiritual encounters versus projections, including specific questions to ask entities that are encountered, methods for testing the consistency and wisdom of guidance received, and techniques for maintaining critical thinking while remaining open to genuine spiritual assistance. The third gate represents the final release of primary identification with physical existence and the beginning of authentic spiritual journey. Consciousness that successfully passes through this gate has accepted the reality of death, learned to distinguish authentic spiritual experiences from projections, and demonstrated readiness to begin the more advanced phases of transition work. The guardians of the third gate evaluate consciousness's emotional stability and ethical development, ensuring that it possesses sufficient maturity to handle the expanded awareness and capabilities that become available in the deeper phases of Amenta. This evaluation corresponds to what many traditions describe as a comprehensive life review, where consciousness experiences the full consequences of all its actions, thoughts, and intentions from the perspective of everyone it affected. The Egyptian texts describe this life review process in remarkable detail, explaining that consciousness doesn't simply observe its past actions, but actually experiences them from multiple perspectives simultaneously, gaining complete understanding of how its choices affected the web of relationships and circumstances that surrounded its earthly existence. Gates 4 through 6 correspond to the phase of evaluation that typically lasts from approximately the 10th through the 25th day after death. During this phase, consciousness undergoes systematic examination of its development in different areas of human experience, receiving guidance about areas that require additional work and recognition for areas where significant progress has been achieved. The fourth gate focuses on consciousness's relationship with knowledge and wisdom. The guardian entities evaluate how consciousness used its intellectual capabilities during earthly existence, whether it sought truth genuinely or merely accumulated information for personal advantage, and whether it developed the discrimination necessary to distinguish between knowledge that serves evolution and information that merely feeds ego gratification. This gate corresponds to encounters with Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and writing, who appears in many near-death accounts as a being of extraordinary intelligence who helps consciousness understand the deeper meanings and lessons embedded in its life experiences. Thoth's evaluation focuses not on how much consciousness knows, but on how wisely it applied its knowledge and whether it developed genuine understanding versus mere intellectual accumulation. The Egyptian text provides specific preparation techniques for successfully navigating Thoth's evaluation, including practices for developing genuine wisdom versus mere intellectual knowledge, methods for integrating emotional understanding with mental concepts, and approaches for maintaining humility and openness to continued learning even when consciousness has achieved significant development. The fifth gate examines consciousness's development of justice, compassion, and ethical behavior. The guardian entities evaluate how consciousness treated other beings during earthly existence, whether it acted according to principles of fairness and kindness, and whether it developed the emotional maturity necessary for wise use of power and influence. This gate corresponds to encounters with Ma'at, the Egyptian goddess of truth and justice, who weighs consciousness's ethical development against cosmic principles of harmony and balance. Ma'at's evaluation focuses on the motivations behind consciousness's actions, rather than just the external results, examining whether consciousness acted from genuine care for others' well-being or from selfish motivations disguised as altruism. The text described Ma'at's evaluation as involving direct experience of the emotional consequences of all ethical choices made during earthly existence. Consciousness experiences not only how its actions affected others, but also how those effects rippled through communities and relationships, gaining complete understanding of the interconnected nature of ethical behavior and its long-term consequences. The sixth gate tests consciousness's relationship with courage, strength, and appropriate use of personal power. The guardian entities evaluate whether consciousness developed genuine strength that serves evolutionary purposes or merely accumulated power for ego gratification and control over others. This gate corresponds to encounters with protective deities who evaluate consciousness's willingness to defend truth and support the development of other beings, even when such actions require personal sacrifice or risk. The evaluation focuses on whether consciousness developed authentic courage that serves larger purposes or merely overcame fears for personal benefit. Gates 7 through 9 represent the phase of purification that typically occurs between the 25th and 35th days after death. During this phase, consciousness undergoes intensive clearing of karmic patterns, unconscious attachments, and developmental limitations that would prevent it from achieving the integration necessary for continued evolution. The seventh gate involves what the Egyptian texts describe as passage through the lake of fire, a purification process that burns away all attachments, identifications, and behavioral patterns that are inconsistent with consciousness's authentic spiritual nature. This isn't punishment, but rather a natural consequence of consciousness choosing to release limitations that no longer serve its development. Modern research into consciousness transformation has identified similar purification processes in advanced meditation traditions, psychedelic therapy, and intensive spiritual practices. These processes typically involve temporary intensification of psychological and emotional challenges as consciousness releases deeply embedded patterns that have limited its development. The lake of fire purification corresponds to what many near-death experiencers describe as encountering intense light that seems to penetrate every aspect of their being, revealing areas that need healing or development, while simultaneously providing the energy and guidance necessary for transformation. The experience is often described as simultaneously challenging and profoundly healing. The eighth gate presents consciousness with encounters with the 42 judges, entities that represent different aspects of cosmic law and evolutionary principle. Each judge evaluates a specific area of development, ensuring that consciousness has achieved sufficient maturity to operate according to universal principles rather than being driven by unconscious patterns or selfish motivations. The 42 judges correspond to what various spiritual traditions describe as comprehensive examination of consciousness development across all major areas of human experience. These evaluations aren't punitive, but rather diagnostic, helping consciousness understand areas where additional development may be beneficial and providing guidance for continued evolution. The Egyptian texts provide detailed descriptions of each judge and the specific area of development they evaluate, along with declarations that consciousness can make to demonstrate its understanding and development in each area. These declarations, known as the negative confessions, aren't just moral guidelines but practical techniques for consciousness restructuring and karmic clearing. The ninth gate involves the final integration of purification work and preparation for the ultimate evaluation that determines consciousness's readiness for continued evolution at higher levels of existence. This gate corresponds to what many traditions describe as the achievement of profound peace and clarity after completing intensive spiritual work. Gates 10 through 12 represent the phase of integration that typically occurs during the final 5 days of the 40-day transition period. During this phase, consciousness either achieves the synthesis necessary for continued evolution or undergoes dissolution back into undifferentiated cosmic awareness. The 10th gate presents consciousness with the opportunity to demonstrate its ability to integrate all aspects of its development into unified, coherent awareness that can operate according to cosmic principles while maintaining individual identity and capability. This integration test corresponds to what the Egyptians considered the most crucial phase of the entire death transition. The integration process involves consciousness demonstrating that it can maintain ethical behavior even when presented with expanded power and capability, that it can access higher wisdom while remaining grounded in practical compassion, and that it can serve evolutionary purposes while honoring its individual creative potential. The 11th gate corresponds to the famous weighing of the heart ceremony, where consciousness's integrated development is evaluated against cosmic standards represented by the feather of Ma'at. This isn't a simple pass-fail test, but rather a comprehensive assessment of consciousness's readiness for the responsibilities and opportunities that come with continued evolution. The weighing process involves consciousness demonstrating that its heart, representing integrated emotional, ethical, and spiritual development, has become light enough to balance perfectly with cosmic principles of truth and justice. This lightness results from releasing all attachments, resentments, fears, and selfish motivations that would create heaviness or resistance to operating according to universal laws. The 12th gate represents either graduation to act status with continued evolution opportunities, or what the texts describe as being devoured by Ammit, a process that appears to involve the dissolution of individual consciousness patterns back into cosmic awareness for eventual recycling into new evolutionary opportunities. Consciousness that achieves Akh status gains access to dimensions of existence and levels of capability that are difficult to describe from ordinary perspectives. The Akh can operate consciously in both physical and non-physical dimensions, access information throughout space and time, influence events through direct intention, and serve as guide and teacher for other consciousness entities still developing through earlier phases. The journey through Amenta isn't a one-time process, but rather represents the fundamental pattern of consciousness evolution that operates at multiple scales and timeframes. Similar transitions occur during major life changes, spiritual initiations, and developmental phases throughout earthly existence. Understanding the Amenta journey provides practical guidance for navigating any major consciousness transformation, whether during life or death. The Egyptian texts emphasize that successful navigation of a menta requires preparation that begins during earthly existence. Consciousness that waits until death to begin developing the capabilities needed for the journey may find itself inadequately prepared for the challenges and opportunities encountered at each gate. The preparation involves developing familiarity with operating through the Ka and Ba vehicles while still alive, cultivating ethical behavior and emotional maturity, building discrimination between authentic spiritual experiences and projections, and achieving sufficient integration of the 9 aspects of consciousness to maintain coherence during major transitions. Advanced Egyptian practitioners learn to journey through a menta consciously while still alive, gaining direct experience of the territory and challenges that consciousness encounters during the death transition. This preparation allowed them to serve as guides for others undergoing the journey and to achieve levels of development that ensured successful navigation when their own death transition occurred. The Amenta journey reveals that death isn't an ending, but rather the most significant examination and graduation opportunity in consciousness evolution. The 40-day period provides optimal conditions for consciousness to release limitations, integrate development, and achieve the synthesis necessary for continued growth at levels that aren't possible while operating through physical embodiment. Understanding the structure and challenges of the Amenta journey transforms our relationship with death from fear and ignorance to informed preparation and confident navigation. The Egyptian texts provide detailed maps for the most important journey any consciousness will undertake, offering practical guidance that can make the difference between successful evolution and missed opportunities for development. The journey through Amenta represents humanity's most sophisticated understanding of consciousness transition and evolution. These aren't primitive religious beliefs, but practical technologies for consciousness development that anticipate modern discoveries about the nature of awareness, identity, and human potential. The Egyptian gift to humanity is a comprehensive manual for the ultimate adventure that awaits every conscious being. Part 4. The Science Behind Egyptian Practices. The sophisticated consciousness technologies developed by ancient Egyptian civilization weren't based on primitive superstition or religious speculation, but on systematic empirical research into the nature of human awareness, energy systems, and the interface between consciousness and physical reality. Modern scientific investigation is finally beginning to understand the advanced principles that the Egyptians discovered through thousands of years of careful observation and experimentation. The mummification process represents one of the most sophisticated applications of consciousness science ever developed, involving far more than simple physical preservation. Chemical analysis of substances used in Egyptian mummification has revealed complex organic compounds that affect neurotransmitter function, electromagnetic field generation, and cellular energy production in ways that support consciousness coherence during the transition from physical to non-physical operation. The primary mummification substance, natron, is a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate that creates specific electromagnetic field conditions when applied to biological tissue. Modern research has discovered that natron generates measurable electromagnetic fields that correspond to frequency ranges associated with enhanced consciousness states and improved coherence between different brain regions. The electromagnetic properties of natron appear to create what researchers call a field stabilization effect that helps maintain the bioelectric patterns generated by living tissue long after clinical death has occurred. This field stabilization may provide the energetic foundation that allows consciousness to maintain connection with the physical form during the initial phases of the death transition, reducing confusion and disorientation while consciousness adapts to operating through non-physical vehicles. The specific minerals contained in natron also affect cellular energy production through their influence on mitochondrial function and ATP synthesis. Recent research has discovered that the mineral combinations found in natron can enhance cellular energy production even in tissues that are no longer receiving oxygen or nutrients through normal biological processes. This enhanced energy production may support the consciousness separation process by providing the energetic resources needed for awareness to transfer from physical to etheric and astral vehicles. The elaborate wrapping procedures used in Egyptian mummification weren't simply protective measures, but sophisticated techniques for creating specific electromagnetic field patterns around the preserved body. The linen wrappings were often treated with resins and oils that contained compounds affecting consciousness states, and the wrapping patterns themselves appear designed to create geometric field configurations that support consciousness coherence. X-ray analysis of Egyptian mummies has revealed that the wrapping patterns follow precise mathematical relationships that correspond to sacred geometry principles found in temple architecture and pyramid construction. These geometric patterns appear to generate standing wave formations that create stable electromagnetic field conditions around the mummified body, providing an energetic anchor point for consciousness during the 40-day transition period. The positioning and orientation of mummified bodies also follow precise astronomical alignments that connect the preserved form with specific celestial energy patterns. The Egyptians understood that consciousness transition is influenced by cosmic electromagnetic fields generated by planetary and stellar bodies, and they oriented their mummification procedures to take advantage of optimal field conditions for supporting consciousness evolution. The canopic jars used to preserve specific organs during mummification weren't simply storage containers, but sophisticated energy accumulation and transmission devices. Each jar was designed to preserve not just the physical organ, but the specific energy functions that the organ performed during life, maintaining these energy patterns as resources that consciousness could access during the death transition. The 4 canopic jars correspond to specific energy centers in the human body that other traditions recognize as chakras or energy centers. The liver jar, protected by Imseti, corresponds to the solar plexus energy center that governs personal power and emotional processing. The lungs jar, protected by Hapi, corresponds to the heart energy center that governs love and compassion. The stomach jar, protected by Duamutef, corresponds to the throat energy center that governs communication and creative expression. The intestines jar, protected by Kebasenuef, corresponds to the root energy center that governs survival and grounding. By preserving these organs in specially designed containers with specific geometric properties and astronomical alignments, the Egyptians created energy storage devices that could support consciousness during different phases of the death transition. Each jar appears designed to provide specific types of energy that consciousness needs for successful navigation of the challenges encountered at different gates of Amenta. The pyramid complexes that served as focal points for Egyptian consciousness research represent the most sophisticated consciousness technology ever constructed by human civilization. The Great Pyramid of Giza demonstrates engineering knowledge that seems impossible for the supposed technological level of ancient Egypt, including precision in construction tolerances, astronomical alignments, and acoustic properties that modern engineers can measure but not fully replicate. The internal chamber system of the Great Pyramid appears designed not just for burial, but for consciousness projection and transformation experiences. The King's Chamber contains acoustic properties that amplify specific frequency ranges while dampening others, creating optimal conditions for altered states of consciousness and out-of-body experiences. The chamber's dimensions correspond precisely to mathematical relationships that generate standing wave patterns at frequencies associated with enhanced psychic perception and consciousness expansion. Acoustic analysis of the King's Chamber has revealed that it resonates most strongly at approximately 110 Hz, a frequency that modern neuroscience has identified as particularly effective for inducing altered states of consciousness and enhanced access to normally unconscious mental processes. Prolonged exposure to 110 Hz vibrations produces measurable changes in brain activity that correspond to states reported during deep meditation, mystical experiences, and consciousness projection. The Grand Gallery that leads to the King's Chamber functions as a massive acoustic amplification system that enhances and focuses sound vibrations entering the chamber. The gallery's design incorporates sophisticated principles of acoustic engineering that wouldn't be rediscovered by modern science until the 20th century, including precise angle calculations for optimal sound reflection and resonance chamber design for maximum amplification efficiency. The Queen's Chamber appears designed for different types of consciousness work, with acoustic properties that enhance frequencies associated with emotional processing and heart-centered awareness. The chamber's position and orientation create electromagnetic field conditions that correspond to what modern researchers call heart coherence, a state where the heart's electromagnetic field becomes highly organized and coherent, producing enhanced intuitive perception and emotional intelligence. The subterranean chamber beneath the pyramid appears designed for the most advanced consciousness projection work, with acoustic and electromagnetic properties that facilitate complete separation of consciousness from physical embodiment. The chamber's depth and orientation create natural sensory deprivation conditions that enhance consciousness's ability to operate independently of physical sensory input. Recent electromagnetic surveys of the Great Pyramid have revealed that the structure generates measurable energy fields that extend far beyond its physical boundaries. These fields appear to be created by the interaction between the pyramid's geometric structure, its astronomical alignment, and the specific materials used in its construction. The energy fields generated by the pyramid correspond to frequency ranges that affect human consciousness and may create optimal conditions for consciousness development and transition work. The precision of the Great Pyramid's construction and alignment suggests access to advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge that mainstream archaeology can't adequately explain. The pyramid's base perimeter corresponds exactly to the circumference of a circle, with radius equal to the pyramid's height, demonstrating knowledge of pi that predates its supposed discovery by Greek mathematicians by over 1,000 years. The pyramid's alignment with cardinal directions is accurate to within 3/60th of a degree, a precision that requires sophisticated surveying techniques and astronomical observation capabilities. The structure's orientation also corresponds precisely to the position of Orion constellation stars at the time of construction, connecting the pyramid with celestial bodies that the Egyptians associated with consciousness evolution and post-mortem journey destinations. The materials used in pyramid construction weren't chosen randomly, but appear selected for their specific electromagnetic and acoustic properties. The limestone blocks used in the pyramid's core contain high concentrations of fossilized organisms that create piezoelectric effects when subjected to pressure, generating small electrical currents that may contribute to the structure's overall energy field generation. The granite used in the King's Chamber contains high concentrations of quartz crystals that create both piezoelectric and pyroelectric effects, generating electrical fields in response to both pressure and temperature changes. These electrical generation properties may explain why the King's Chamber creates measurable electromagnetic field anomalies that affect electronic equipment and may influence human consciousness states. The mortar used between limestone blocks contains organic compounds that weren't available in the immediate geographical area, suggesting sophisticated trade networks and material science knowledge. Chemical analysis has revealed that this mortar contains substances that affect electromagnetic field propagation and may serve to enhance the energy field generation properties of the overall structure. The sophisticated engineering principles demonstrated in pyramid construction indicate access to advanced understanding of physics, mathematics, and consciousness science that challenges conventional historical timelines. The Egyptians appear to have possessed knowledge of electromagnetic field generation, acoustic resonance, consciousness, matter interaction principles, and sacred geometry applications that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Temple complexes throughout Egypt demonstrate similar sophisticated understanding of consciousness technology applications. The Temple of Dendera contains chambers with acoustic properties specifically designed to induce altered states of consciousness with resonance frequencies that correspond to brainwave patterns associated with expanded awareness and psychic perception. The temple's famous Dendera light reliefs appear to depict electrical devices and energy generation systems that mainstream archaeology interprets as purely symbolic representations of mythological concepts. However, electrical engineers who have analyzed these reliefs identify clear representations of electrical components, including batteries, conductors, insulators, and what appear to be gas discharge tubes or primitive light bulbs. Experimental reconstruction of devices based on the Dendera light reliefs has produced functional electrical systems capable of generating light and electromagnetic fields using materials and techniques that were available to ancient Egyptian craftsmen. These experiments suggest that the Egyptians possessed practical knowledge of electricity generation and application thousands of years before its supposed discovery by modern science. The Temple of Edfu contains chambers with electromagnetic anomalies that affect compass readings and electronic equipment, indicating the presence of strong magnetic fields generated by unknown means. The temple's construction incorporates large amounts of magnetite and other magnetically active materials arranged in specific geometric patterns that may create focused magnetic field effects. These magnetic field concentrations appear designed to affect human consciousness states, potentially enhancing psychic perception, facilitating out-of-body experiences, and supporting the consciousness projection techniques that were taught in Egyptian mystery schools. Modern research has confirmed that exposure to specific types of magnetic fields can indeed alter brain activity and consciousness states in ways that correspond to reports from advanced meditation practitioners. The Temple of Philae demonstrates sophisticated understanding of acoustic engineering principles applied to consciousness development. The temple's chambers create complex acoustic effects including sound focusing, echo manipulation, and resonance amplification that enhance the effectiveness of chanting, toning, and other sound-based consciousness techniques. Acoustic analysis of Philae's chambers has revealed that they amplify specific frequency ranges while dampening others, creating optimal acoustic conditions for the Galder chanting techniques described in Egyptian consciousness development texts. The temple's acoustic properties suggest that the Egyptians understood the relationship between specific sound frequencies and consciousness states with remarkable precision. The role of sound and vibration in Egyptian consciousness technology extends far beyond temple acoustics to include sophisticated understanding of how specific frequencies affect human awareness, energy systems, and consciousness evolution processes. The Egyptians developed detailed knowledge of what modern researchers call consciousness acoustics, the application of sound and vibration for enhanced awareness and consciousness development. The sistrum, a musical instrument associated with the goddess Isis, generates complex harmonic patterns that include frequencies in the 40-42 Hz range, corresponding to what modern neuroscience identifies as gamma brainwaves associated with heightened awareness, enhanced pattern recognition, and integrated consciousness states. Regular exposure to sistrum vibrations may have served as a consciousness training technique for developing the awareness states needed for successful death transition navigation. Egyptian chanting techniques, preserved in fragmentary form in Coptic Christian traditions, employ specific tonal patterns and breathing rhythms that produce measurable alterations in brainwave activity and consciousness states. These chanting patterns appear designed to facilitate the consciousness projection and energy body development techniques described in Egyptian spiritual training texts. The systematic application of sound, rhythm, and vibration in Egyptian spiritual practices anticipated modern discoveries about the role of acoustic stimulation in consciousness development by thousands of years. Current research into binaural beats, isochronic tones, and acoustic brainwave entrainment confirms that specific sound patterns can indeed produce the consciousness state changes that Egyptian texts describe as essential for spiritual development and death transition preparation. The Egyptian understanding of consciousness-sound relationships extended to their use of specific musical scales and harmonic intervals that correspond to what other traditions recognize as chakra frequencies or energy center activation tones. Egyptian musical notation, though fragmentary, appears to include mathematical relationships between tones that create optimal resonance patterns for consciousness development work. The sophisticated acoustic technologies employed in Egyptian temples and consciousness training programs required advanced understanding of mathematics, physics, and human psychophysiology that challenges conventional assumptions about ancient technological capabilities. The Egyptians appear to have possessed comprehensive knowledge of how consciousness interacts with physical environments and how environmental conditions can be optimized to support consciousness development and evolution. The chemical technologies employed in Egyptian spiritual practices included sophisticated understanding of how specific substances affect consciousness states, energy system function, and the interface between awareness and physical embodiment. The incenses, oils, and other preparations used in Egyptian temples weren't simply pleasant aromatics, but precisely formulated consciousness-altering preparations designed to support specific types of spiritual work. Analysis of residues from Egyptian temple incense burners has revealed complex organic compounds that affect neurotransmitter function, particularly in brain regions associated with mystical experiences, expanded awareness, and altered states of consciousness. These compounds include naturally occurring psychoactive substances that enhance psychic perception, facilitate out-of-body experiences, and support the consciousness projection techniques taught in mystery schools. The famous Kai-Fi incense used in Egyptian temples contains over 20 different organic compounds that work synergistically to produce consciousness states conducive to spiritual development and divine communion. Modern pharmacological analysis has confirmed that Kai-Fi contains substances that reduce anxiety, enhance pattern recognition, facilitate access to normally unconscious mental processes, and support the relaxed attention states that are optimal for consciousness projection work. The oils used for mummification and spiritual anointing contain organic compounds that affect electromagnetic field generation in biological tissue and may help maintain the energetic coherence needed for consciousness to maintain connection with physical and etheric vehicles during transition processes. These oils appear to have been formulated based on sophisticated understanding of how consciousness interacts with electromagnetic fields and energy systems. The Egyptian development of consciousness-affecting chemical preparations required advanced knowledge of organic chemistry, pharmacology, and human psychophysiology that suggests systematic empirical research conducted over long periods of time. The precision and effectiveness of these preparations indicate that Egyptian spiritual scientists possessed comprehensive understanding of consciousness-matter interaction principles that modern science is only beginning to explore. The integration of architectural, acoustic, electromagnetic, and chemical technologies in Egyptian consciousness development programs represents the most sophisticated approach to human potential enhancement ever documented in human history. The Egyptians created comprehensive environmental systems designed to optimize human consciousness function and support the development of capabilities that most modern people consider impossible or supernatural. The suppression and misinterpretation of Egyptian consciousness technologies represents one of the greatest losses in human intellectual history. We've been deprived of advanced understanding of human potential, consciousness development, and practical technologies for enhancing awareness and facilitating spiritual evolution that could revolutionize modern approaches to psychology, medicine, education, and human development. The scientific validation of Egyptian consciousness technologies through modern research demonstrates that these weren't primitive religious practices, but sophisticated applications of advanced scientific principles that we're only beginning to understand. The Egyptians possessed comprehensive knowledge of consciousness science, energy systems, and human potential that surpasses much of what mainstream science currently recognizes as possible. The revival of authentic Egyptian consciousness technologies could provide practical solutions for many problems facing modern civilization, including mental health challenges, consciousness development limitations, end-of-life care improvements, and the enhancement of human capabilities for addressing complex global challenges. The Egyptian legacy offers proven technologies for consciousness development that have been tested and refined over thousands of years of systematic application. Understanding the scientific principles underlying Egyptian consciousness technologies reveals that human beings possess capabilities and potentials that mainstream culture systematically ignores or dismisses as impossible. We aren't limited biological machines, but sophisticated consciousness entities with multiple energy systems, expanded awareness capabilities, and evolutionary potentials that extend far beyond physical existence. The Egyptian contribution to human knowledge represents practical technologies for accessing and developing these capabilities, providing systematic approaches for consciousness enhancement, spiritual development, and preparation for the ultimate journey that every human being will eventually undertake. Their scientific legacy offers hope for human potential that extends far beyond current cultural limitations and opens possibilities for individual and collective development that could transform human civilization itself. Part 5. The 40 Days in Other Traditions. The appearance of the 40-day period in spiritual traditions throughout the world provides compelling evidence that this time frame represents a universal aspect of consciousness transition rather than a culturally specific belief system. From the mountains of Tibet to the deserts of the Middle East, from ancient Greece to indigenous American traditions, cultures that had no historical contact with each other developed remarkably similar understandings of the 40-day period as a crucial phase in consciousness transformation and spiritual development. This universal recognition suggests that the 40-day period corresponds to actual phenomenological territory that consciousness encounters during major transitions, whether during life-changing spiritual experiences or the ultimate transition of physical death. The consistency across cultures and time periods indicates that these traditions were documenting direct experiential encounters with consciousness evolution processes, rather than creating arbitrary religious doctrines. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition preserves perhaps the most detailed and systematic exploration of post-mortem consciousness navigation outside of Egyptian sources. The Bardo Thodol, commonly known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes a 49-day intermediate state, Bardo, between death and rebirth that corresponds remarkably closely to the Egyptian 40-day journey through Amenta. The Tibetan description divides the post-mortem journey into three main phases: the Chikai Bardo, moment of death, the Chonyad Bardo, experiencing reality, and the Sidpa Bardo, becoming or rebirth. These phases correlate closely with the Egyptian understanding of consciousness separating from physical embodiment, navigating the challenges and opportunities of the intermediate realm, and achieving either liberation or recycling into new evolutionary opportunities. The Chikai Bardo corresponds to the initial phase of the Egyptian journey, where consciousness separates from the physical body and begins adapting to operation through non-physical vehicles. Both traditions emphasize that this initial phase provides optimal opportunities for consciousness to achieve liberation if it maintains awareness and recognition of its true nature during the transition process. The Tibetan texts describe the appearance of clear light during the moment of death that provides immediate opportunity for consciousness to achieve liberation through recognition of its luminous, empty nature. This corresponds to Egyptian descriptions of encountering divine light that offers consciousness the opportunity to merge with cosmic awareness and bypass the need for further evolutionary development through embodied existence. Both traditions emphasize that consciousness that doesn't achieve immediate liberation during the initial phase must navigate more complex challenges and opportunities during the intermediate period. The Chonyad Bardo corresponds to the Egyptian journey through the gates of Amenta, where consciousness encounters various entities, tests, and transformative experiences that determine its evolutionary trajectory. The Tibetan description of encountering peaceful and wrathful deities during the Chonyad Bardo parallels the Egyptian accounts of meeting various gods and goddesses who evaluate different aspects of consciousness development. Both traditions explain that these entities aren't external beings, but manifestations of consciousness's own potential for wisdom and compassion, or its unresolved psychological patterns and unconscious limitations. The Sidpa Bardo corresponds to the final phase of the Egyptian journey, where consciousness either achieves the integration necessary for continued evolution at higher levels of existence, or undergoes dissolution and recycling into new developmental opportunities. Both traditions describe this phase as involving comprehensive evaluation of consciousness development and determination of optimal conditions for continued growth. The remarkable similarities between Egyptian and Tibetan descriptions of post-mortem consciousness navigation extend to specific details about the challenges encountered, the methods for successful navigation, and the preparation techniques that can be practiced during lifetime to enhance the probability of successful transition. These correlations suggest that both traditions were documenting the same underlying consciousness evolution processes. The preparation practices described in both traditions include similar techniques for consciousness projection, development of discrimination between authentic spiritual experiences and projections, cultivation of ethical behavior and emotional maturity, and systematic training in operating through non-physical vehicles while still alive. Both traditions emphasize the importance of maintaining awareness and recognition during the transition process, providing specific techniques for avoiding confusion and disorientation when consciousness encounters unfamiliar modes of operation and perception. The texts from both cultures serve as navigation manuals for consciousness, traveling through territory that becomes accessible only during major transitions. The Christian tradition contains numerous references to 40-day periods that correspond to consciousness transformation and spiritual development, though these connections are often obscured by theological interpretations that emphasize belief systems rather than practical consciousness development techniques. Jesus spent 40 days fasting in the wilderness, where he encountered temptations and achieved spiritual clarity that prepared him for his teaching mission. This corresponds to the consciousness, purification, and testing processes described in both Egyptian and Tibetan traditions as essential for spiritual development and preparation for advanced service to others. The 40 days between Jesus' resurrection and ascension represent a transition period where consciousness operated according to principles that transcended normal physical limitations while maintaining individual identity and capability. This corresponds to Egyptian descriptions of Akh consciousness that can function in both physical and non-physical dimensions, without losing coherence or effectiveness. The Christian tradition of 40 days of Lent as a period of purification and spiritual preparation echoes the understanding found in other traditions that 40-day periods provide optimal opportunities for consciousness, transformation, and development. The practices associated with Lent, fasting, prayer, charitable service, and self-examination correspond to preparation techniques found in consciousness development traditions throughout the world. The Islamic tradition recognizes a 40-day period after death, during which the soul remains connected to the earthly realm before beginning its journey to other dimensions of existence. This period corresponds closely to the Egyptian and Tibetan understanding of consciousness requiring time to adapt to operating through non-physical vehicles and complete its transition work. Islamic mystical traditions preserve detailed techniques for consciousness development that include 40-day retreat periods, khalwa, designed to facilitate spiritual transformation and enhanced awareness. These practices involve sensory withdrawal, intensive prayer and meditation, and systematic cultivation of the consciousness states necessary for direct spiritual experience. The Sufi understanding of the 40-day retreat as a method for achieving spiritual purification and enhanced awareness corresponds to similar practices found in Egyptian mystery schools and Tibetan meditation training programs. All these traditions recognize 40-day periods as providing optimal timeframes for consciousness to undergo fundamental transformations that enhance spiritual capability and awareness. Jewish mystical traditions contain references to 40-day periods for soul purification after death and 40-day periods for spiritual preparation and transformation during lifetime. The Kabbalistic understanding of consciousness structure and development shows remarkable similarities to both Egyptian and Tibetan models, suggesting common sources or mutual influence between these traditions. The 40 days that Moses spent on Mount Sinai receiving divine instruction corresponds to consciousness development experiences described in other traditions as involving direct encounter with cosmic intelligence and reception of guidance for spiritual evolution and service to collective development. Hindu traditions recognize similar timeframes for consciousness transition and spiritual development, though these are often described in terms of different numerical frameworks that nevertheless correspond to approximately 40-day periods when calculated according to different calendar systems and consciousness timescales. The Vedantic understanding of consciousness as operating through multiple vehicles, koshas, that separate during death and can be developed during lifetime corresponds closely to the Egyptian model of 9 consciousness aspects and the Tibetan understanding of consciousness vehicles and their functions. Indigenous American traditions throughout North and South America include vision quest practices that often involve 40-day periods of isolation, fasting, and spiritual preparation designed to facilitate direct encounter with spiritual guidance and consciousness transformation. These practices demonstrate that the 40-day period for consciousness development was recognized by cultures that had no historical contact with Old World traditions. The consistency of 40-day recognition across geographically and culturally isolated traditions provides compelling evidence that this time frame corresponds to universal aspects of consciousness evolution rather than cultural borrowing or coincidental similarity. The specific practices and understandings associated with 40-day periods show remarkable consistency across traditions, suggesting common experiential sources. Modern consciousness research has begun to identify potential neurological and psychological bases for the 40-day period's significance in human development and transformation. Research into circadian rhythms, ultradian cycles, and longer biological rhythms has revealed that human consciousness and physiology operate according to complex cyclical patterns that include approximately 40-day cycles in various biological and psychological functions. Studies of meditation retreat experiences, psychedelic therapy protocols, and intensive consciousness development programs have identified approximately 40-day periods as optimal timeframes for achieving significant and lasting consciousness transformations. These findings suggest that the 40-day period may represent a natural rhythm in consciousness development that ancient traditions discovered through empirical observation. Near-death experience research has documented cases where individuals report experiencing comprehensive life reviews, encounters with spiritual entities, and profound consciousness transformations during clinical death periods that lasted only minutes or hours, but seemed to involve much longer time frames from the experiencer's perspective. Some researchers suggest that consciousness may operate according to different temporal frameworks during non-ordinary states, allowing 40-day equivalents of experience to occur within much shorter objective timeframes. Research into consciousness and time perception has revealed that awareness can experience vastly different temporal rhythms depending on the state of consciousness and the mode of operation. During dreams, deep meditation, and other altered states, consciousness can experience hours or days of subjective time within minutes of objective time, suggesting that the 40-day journey described in various traditions might occur according to consciousness time rather than physical time. The universal recognition of 40-day periods across spiritual traditions suggests that these timeframes represent optimal windows for consciousness transformation that operate according to natural rhythms in awareness development. These rhythms may be related to biological cycles, astronomical cycles, or intrinsic patterns in consciousness evolution that ancient traditions discovered through systematic observation and experimentation. The practical implications of this universal pattern include the possibility that 40-day periods can be used deliberately for consciousness development and spiritual transformation during lifetime. Many contemporary practitioners have reported significant results from 40-day meditation retreats, fasting periods, and intensive spiritual practice programs that follow traditional frameworks developed by ancient consciousness researchers. The cross-cultural consistency of 40-day recognition also suggests that the post-mortem consciousness journey described in various traditions represents actual phenomenological territory that every human being will encounter regardless of their cultural background or belief systems. This means that preparation techniques developed by any of these traditions may be universally applicable for enhancing the probability of successful navigation of post-mortem challenges and opportunities. The synthesis of insights from multiple traditions provides a more comprehensive understanding of consciousness evolution and transformation than any single tradition offers alone. By comparing and integrating the knowledge preserved in Egyptian, Tibetan, Christian, Islamic, Jewish, Hindu, and indigenous traditions, we can develop more complete maps of consciousness potential and more effective preparation techniques for both lifetime development and post-mortem navigation. The universal recognition of 40-day periods across spiritual traditions represents one of humanity's most important discoveries about consciousness, evolution, and transformation. This knowledge offers practical guidance for individual development and spiritual preparation that has been tested and refined through thousands of years of systematic application across multiple cultures and contexts. Understanding the universal pattern of 40-day consciousness transformation provides hope that human beings possess capabilities and potentials that transcend cultural limitations and extend far beyond what mainstream culture recognizes as possible. The consistency across traditions suggests that consciousness evolution follows universal principles that can be studied, understood, and applied regardless of cultural background or belief system. The revival of authentic understanding of 40-day consciousness transformation could provide practical tools for addressing many challenges facing modern civilization, including mental health problems, spiritual alienation, end-of-life anxiety, and the need for enhanced human capabilities for addressing complex global problems. The wisdom preserved in these traditions offers proven methods for consciousness development that could benefit both individuals and collective human development. Part 6. Practical Techniques for the Living. The Egyptian understanding of consciousness and death transition wasn't merely theoretical knowledge preserved in ancient texts, but a comprehensive system of practical techniques that individuals could use during their lifetime to prepare for the ultimate journey that every human being must eventually undertake. These techniques were designed to develop the consciousness capabilities, energy system functions, and spiritual maturity that would prove essential for successful navigation of the 40-day post-mortem transition. Modern practitioners who wish to apply authentic Egyptian consciousness development methods can adapt these ancient techniques for contemporary use, gaining access to consciousness enhancement capabilities while simultaneously preparing for the most important examination of their existence. The Egyptian approach emphasizes that death preparation isn't morbid preoccupation, but practical development work that enhances life quality while ensuring optimal outcomes during the ultimate transition. The foundation of Egyptian consciousness preparation involves learning to operate consciously through the Ka, the energy double that serves as the primary vehicle for consciousness during the initial phases of death transition. Kai development training allows individuals to become familiar with non-physical consciousness operation while still alive, reducing confusion and disorientation during the actual death process. The basic Kai exercise begins with establishing deep physical relaxation while maintaining alert mental awareness. Practitioners lie in a comfortable position with the spine straight and systematically relax all physical tension while keeping the mind clear and focused. This combination of physical relaxation with mental alertness creates optimal conditions for consciousness to begin separating from identification with the physical body. Once deep relaxation is achieved, practitioners visualize a precise duplicate of their physical body composed of subtle energy rather than dense matter. This energy duplicate should be imagined as identical to the physical form in every detail, but composed of light, energy, or subtle substance that can move independently of physical limitations. The visualization process requires careful attention to creating an exact replica rather than an idealized or modified version of the physical body. The Ka represents consciousness operating through an energetic duplicate of the physical form, and maintaining precise correspondence between the Ka and physical body helps ensure successful energy transfer during the separation process. After establishing clear visualization of the Ka body, practitioners begin experimenting with moving consciousness awareness from the physical form into the energy duplicate. This involves shifting the sense of "I am here" from the physical body to the Ka, while maintaining clear awareness and control over the process. The initial attempts at consciousness transfer typically produce subtle sensations of energy movement, tingling, or floating that indicate the beginning of Ka activation. Advanced practitioners report achieving clear separation experiences where consciousness operates fully through the Ka while maintaining awareness of the physical body from an external perspective. Regular Ka exercise practice develops the consciousness, flexibility, and energy-body coherence that will prove essential during the death transition. Individuals who achieve proficiency in Ka operation while alive report much less confusion and disorientation during near-death experiences and express confidence about their ability to navigate post-mortem challenges. The second major category of Egyptian consciousness preparation involves developing heart-centered awareness that can access intuitive wisdom, emotional intelligence, and direct connection with cosmic intelligence patterns. The Egyptians understood the heart as the primary interface between individual consciousness and universal wisdom, making heart development essential for successful navigation of post-mortem evaluation processes. Heart consciousness development begins with establishing regular practices that shift awareness from head-centered thinking to heart-centered sensing and knowing. This involves learning to access the heart's own intelligence capabilities rather than using the heart merely as an emotional response system controlled by mental processes. The basic heart meditation involves placing attention on the physical heart area while breathing slowly and deeply, allowing awareness to settle into the heart space rather than remaining focused in the head. As attention stabilizes in the heart area, practitioners begin sensing the heart's electromagnetic field, and the information that this field contains about emotional states, relationship dynamics, and environmental conditions. Advanced heart meditation includes learning to ask questions through heart awareness and receiving answers through direct knowing, rather than mental analysis. The heart's intelligence operates through immediate recognition and intuitive understanding rather than logical reasoning processes, providing access to wisdom that isn't available through mental analysis alone. Heart coherence practices involve creating harmonious relationships between heart rhythm, breathing patterns, and emotional states that generate optimal electromagnetic field conditions for enhanced intuitive perception and emotional intelligence. Research has confirmed that heart coherence states improve decision-making capability, stress resilience, and interpersonal effectiveness. The Egyptian emphasis on heart-centered consciousness anticipated modern discoveries about the heart's neural network and electromagnetic field generation capabilities. The heart contains over 40,000 neurons that can operate independently of the brain and generates electromagnetic fields that extend several feet beyond the physical body, affecting other people and environmental conditions. The famous weighing of the heart ceremony that occurs during the Egyptian death transition represents evaluation of consciousness's development of heart-centered wisdom, compassion, and ethical maturity. Individuals who develop heart consciousness during lifetime will be better prepared for this crucial evaluation phase of the post-mortem journey. The third essential area of Egyptian consciousness preparation involves working with the shadow aspects of consciousness to integrate unconscious patterns, resolve karmic issues, and achieve the psychological maturity necessary for advanced spiritual development. The Egyptians understood that consciousness must confront and integrate its shadow material to achieve the coherence necessary for successful post-mortem navigation. Shadow work practices begin with systematic self-examination to identify unconscious patterns, suppressed emotions, and unresolved psychological issues that influence behavior and limit development. This requires honest assessment of personal motivations, reactions, and behavioral patterns that may be driven by unconscious factors rather than conscious choice. The Egyptian approach to shadow integration involved what they called confessions, where individuals systematically identified and acknowledged all actions, thoughts, and motivations that were inconsistent with cosmic principles of truth, justice, and harmony. These confessions weren't designed to produce guilt or shame, but to develop clear awareness of areas requiring additional development work. Modern shadow work techniques that correspond to Egyptian practices include regular journaling about emotional reactions and behavioral patterns, seeking feedback from trusted friends about unconscious behaviors, engaging in therapy or counseling to explore unconscious motivations, and practicing meditation techniques that bring unconscious content into conscious awareness. The 42 negative confessions found in Egyptian texts provide specific categories for shadow work examination, covering areas including honesty, compassion, justice, humility, emotional control, and service to others. Practitioners can use these categories as systematic frameworks for identifying and working with unconscious patterns that limit development. Shadow integration work also involves developing compassion and forgiveness for personal limitations while taking responsibility for transforming patterns that create suffering for self and others. The Egyptian understanding emphasizes that shadow work isn't about eliminating all personality traits, but about bringing unconscious patterns under conscious direction and ensuring that behavior serves evolutionary purposes. The fourth area of Egyptian consciousness preparation involves developing discrimination between authentic spiritual experiences and projections or illusions created by unconscious expectations, desires, or fears. This discrimination capability becomes crucial during the death transition when consciousness encounters experiences that may be authentic spiritual guidance or projections of its own psychological patterns. Discrimination development begins with learning to distinguish between different types of inner experiences during meditation, prayer, and other consciousness practices. Practitioners learn to recognize the difference between mental projections created by imagination, emotional reactions generated by unconscious patterns, and authentic spiritual guidance that provides wisdom beyond ordinary mental capabilities. The Egyptian text provides specific criteria for recognizing authentic spiritual experiences, including consistency with cosmic principles of truth and justice, enhancement of wisdom and compassion rather than ego gratification, and practical guidance that serves evolutionary development rather than temporary pleasure or power accumulation. Discrimination practices include learning to test inner guidance against practical results, seeking confirmation of important insights through multiple sources, and maintaining healthy skepticism about experiences that seem to confirm existing beliefs or expectations rather than providing genuine new understanding. Advanced discrimination development involves learning to recognize the difference between encounters with authentic spiritual entities and projections of personal psychological patterns. Authentic spiritual guidance typically challenges consciousness to grow beyond current limitations and serves larger evolutionary purposes, while projections tend to confirm existing beliefs and serve ego gratification. The fifth area of Egyptian consciousness preparation involves systematic development of ethical behavior and service orientation that demonstrates readiness for the expanded capabilities and responsibilities that become available during advanced spiritual development. The Egyptian understanding emphasizes that consciousness capabilities expand in proportion to demonstrated wisdom and compassion in using existing abilities. Ethical development involves more than following moral rules, but requires developing genuine understanding of how individual actions affect the larger web of relationships and circumstances that surround personal existence. This includes recognizing the interconnected nature of all consciousness and developing motivation to serve collective evolution rather than just personal advancement. Practical ethical development includes regular assessment of motivations behind actions, seeking opportunities to serve others' development and well-being, practicing honesty in all communications and relationships, and taking responsibility for the consequences of personal choices rather than blaming external circumstances for personal difficulties. Service orientation development involves finding ways to contribute to collective well-being and consciousness evolution that match individual capabilities and circumstances. This doesn't require dramatic lifestyle changes, but rather involves approaching existing responsibilities and relationships with enhanced awareness of how personal actions can serve larger purposes. The Egyptian emphasis on service as preparation for spiritual advancement corresponds to understanding found throughout wisdom, traditions that consciousness development serves collective evolution rather than just individual enhancement. Individuals who develop service orientation during lifetime will be better prepared for the post-mortem opportunities to serve others who are still developing through earlier phases of consciousness evolution. The integration of these 5 preparation areas, K development, heart consciousness, shadow work, discrimination, and service orientation, provides comprehensive preparation for the death transition while simultaneously enhancing life quality and effectiveness. These practices aren't separate spiritual exercises, but integrated approaches to consciousness development that affect all areas of daily experience. Regular practice of Egyptian consciousness preparation techniques produces gradual but significant improvements in health, relationships, creativity, intuitive guidance, emotional stability, and sense of meaning and purpose. These benefits emerge naturally from enhanced consciousness function rather than being forced through artificial techniques or external manipulations. The most important aspect of Egyptian consciousness preparation is approaching the practices with sincere motivation to serve consciousness evolution rather than accumulating personal power or spiritual experiences for ego gratification. The techniques are designed to enhance consciousness capability in service of larger purposes, and they work most effectively when approached with authentic dedication to growth and service. Contemporary practitioners who commit to systematic Egyptian consciousness preparation often report enhanced effectiveness in their chosen fields, improved relationships with family and colleagues, greater resilience during challenging circumstances, and increased sense of connection with larger purpose and meaning. These improvements provide immediate benefits while preparing consciousness for the ultimate journey that awaits every human being. The Egyptian gift to humanity includes not just theoretical knowledge about consciousness and death, but practical technologies for consciousness development that can enhance human potential and prepare individuals for successful navigation of the most important transition any consciousness will undertake. These techniques represent tested and proven methods for human development that have been refined through thousands of years of systematic application and can be adapted for effective use in contemporary contexts. Part 7. Secrets of the Pharaohs and High Priests. The most advanced consciousness technologies developed by ancient Egyptian civilization were reserved for pharaohs and high priests, who underwent intensive initiation processes that prepared them to serve as bridges between human consciousness and cosmic intelligence. These elite practitioners achieved levels of consciousness development that enabled them to function as conscious intermediaries between earthly existence and higher dimensions of reality, maintaining awareness and capability that transcended normal human limitations. The initiation procedures conducted within Egyptian temple complexes represented the most sophisticated consciousness development programs ever documented in human history. These weren't symbolic ceremonies or primitive religious rituals, but systematic training programs that produced measurable alterations in consciousness function, energy system activation, and psychic capability development that enabled initiates to operate according to principles that seem supernatural from ordinary perspectives. The Great Pyramid initiation process, conducted within the King's Chamber of the Giza complex, involved what the Egyptians called death and rebirth experiences, where consciousness learned to separate completely from physical embodiment while maintaining full awareness and the ability to return to normal operation. This training provided direct experience of the territory that consciousness navigates during actual death, while developing the skills necessary for conscious navigation of post-mortem challenges. Initiates undergoing pyramid initiation were placed within the granite sarcophagus in the King's Chamber and left alone for periods of up to 3 days, while consciousness learned to operate independently of physical support systems. The chamber's acoustic and electromagnetic properties facilitated consciousness projection, while the sensory isolation conditions helped consciousness develop independence from physical sensory input. The pyramid's internal geometry creates specific electromagnetic field conditions that affect brainwave patterns and consciousness states in ways that facilitate out-of-body experiences and enhance psychic perception. Modern electromagnetic surveys have confirmed that the King's Chamber generates measurable energy field anomalies that correspond to frequencies associated with altered consciousness states and enhanced awareness capabilities. Initiates who successfully completed pyramid training reported achieving conscious death experiences where they traveled through the territories described in the Egyptian texts, encountered the entities and challenges described in post-mortem navigation manuals, and gained direct knowledge of the consciousness evolution processes that occur during actual death transitions. The training provided through pyramid initiation enabled pharaohs and high priests to serve as conscious guides for others undergoing death transitions, offering practical assistance and guidance based on direct experience of the territory rather than theoretical knowledge alone. This guidance capability was considered essential for maintaining cultural continuity and ensuring that important knowledge was preserved across generations. The Dendera Temple Complex served as another major center for advanced consciousness training, focusing particularly on developing the abilities needed for healing, prophecy, and communication with non-physical intelligences. The temple's chambers contain acoustic properties specifically designed to enhance psychic perception and facilitate communication with entities operating in dimensions beyond ordinary physical awareness. Archaeological investigation of Denderi has revealed chambers with electromagnetic anomalies that affect electronic equipment and create measurable alterations in local energy field conditions. These anomalies appear to be generated by specific geometric arrangements of magnetically active materials that create focused energy field effects similar to those found in modern consciousness research laboratories. The famous Dendera light reliefs, found in underground chambers beneath the temple, appear to depict sophisticated electrical devices, including what electrical engineers identify as batteries, conductors, insulators, and gas discharge tubes. Experimental reconstruction of devices based on these reliefs has produced functional electrical systems capable of generating light and electromagnetic fields using materials and techniques available to ancient Egyptian craftsmen. The electrical generation capabilities depicted at Dendera suggest that Egyptian priests possessed practical knowledge of electromagnetic field manipulation that they used to create optimal environmental conditions for consciousness development and spiritual communication. The ability to generate controlled electromagnetic fields would provide significant advantages for facilitating altered consciousness states and enhancing psychic perception capabilities. Training conducted at Dendera included systematic development of healing abilities through what appears to have been direct energy manipulation and consciousness-based intervention techniques. Initiates learned to perceive the energy field patterns associated with health and disease, and to use focused intention and energy projection to restore optimal energy flow patterns in individuals experiencing physical or psychological imbalances. The healing techniques taught at Dendera anticipated modern discoveries about the electromagnetic properties of living tissue and the role of bioelectric fields in health and disease. Contemporary research has confirmed that healthy biological systems generate coherent electromagnetic field patterns, while disease systems show disrupted or chaotic field patterns that can be measured and potentially corrected through appropriate intervention. The Temple of Edfu served as a major center for training in what the Egyptians called divine kingship, the development of consciousness capabilities that enabled pharaohs to serve as conscious links between human civilization and cosmic intelligence patterns. This training involved learning to access information and guidance from sources beyond ordinary human awareness, while maintaining practical effectiveness in governing complex social and political systems. Edfu's chambers contain electromagnetic anomalies that affect compass readings and electronic equipment, indicating the presence of strong magnetic field concentrations that appear designed to facilitate altered consciousness states and enhance psychic perception. The temple's construction incorporates large quantities of magnetite and other magnetically active materials arranged in geometric patterns that create focused magnetic field effects. The training conducted at Edfu included development of prophetic abilities that enabled pharaohs and advisors to access information about probable future developments and optimal timing for important political and military decisions. Historical records suggest that Egyptian rulers who followed guidance received through these techniques achieved significantly better outcomes than those who relied solely on conventional political and military analysis. The prophetic training involved learning to access what the Egyptians called the web of fate, or cosmic information networks that connect all events and circumstances throughout space and time. Advanced practitioners developed the ability to perceive probability patterns and influence events through strategic interventions that aligned human actions with beneficial cosmic trends and opportunities. The Temple of Philae served as the primary center for training priestesses in the most advanced consciousness development techniques, including the abilities needed for serving as oracles, conducting consciousness-based healing work, and facilitating spiritual initiation experiences for others. The temple's location on an island in the Nile created natural isolation conditions that enhanced consciousness development, while the temple's acoustic properties facilitated the sound-based techniques that were central to advanced Egyptian spiritual practice. Training at Philae included systematic development of what the Egyptians called divine speech, or the ability to channel guidance and information from cosmic intelligence sources, while maintaining full conscious awareness and critical discrimination. This channeling capability differed from mediumship or possession states in that the practitioner maintained complete conscious control while serving as a clear conduit for higher intelligence communication. The oracle training conducted at Philae produced individuals who could access information about optimal solutions for complex problems, guidance about individual spiritual development needs, and insights about collective issues affecting entire communities or civilizations. The oracles served as advisors to pharaohs and high officials, while also providing guidance for ordinary citizens, seeking direction about important life decisions. The technologies employed in Egyptian temple training included sophisticated applications of sound, light, electromagnetic fields, and chemical preparations designed to facilitate specific consciousness states and capabilities. These technologies were based on systematic research into the relationships between environmental conditions and consciousness function that anticipated modern discoveries about consciousness, environment interactions. The Ankh, one of the most recognizable Egyptian symbols, appears to have been more than a symbolic representation, but an actual device used in consciousness development and energy manipulation work. Analysis of Ankh artifacts has revealed internal structures and material compositions that suggest electromagnetic field generation capabilities and possible consciousness-affecting properties. Experimental investigation of ankh-shaped devices, constructed according to ancient specifications, has produced measurable electromagnetic field effects and reported consciousness-altering experiences in individuals using these devices for meditation and consciousness development work. The ankh appears to have been designed as a tool for focusing and directing consciousness energy in ways that enhance spiritual development and psychic capability. The staff devices carried by Egyptian pharaohs and high priests also appear to have been functional consciousness technologies rather than merely ceremonial objects. These staffs contain internal structures and material compositions that suggest electromagnetic field manipulation capabilities and possible consciousness-affecting properties similar to those found in ankh devices. The use of staff devices in Egyptian spiritual practice appears to have involved techniques for projecting consciousness energy, creating protective energy fields, and influencing the consciousness states of others through directed electromagnetic field effects. These capabilities would have provided significant advantages for consciousness development work and spiritual leadership responsibilities. The elaborate headdresses worn by pharaohs and high priests contain geometric structures and material compositions that appear designed to enhance consciousness function and facilitate communication with non-physical intelligence sources. The geometric patterns incorporated into these headdresses correspond to sacred geometry principles that create specific electromagnetic field effects when constructed using appropriate materials. Modern analysis of headdress artifacts has revealed internal structures containing crystalline materials, metallic elements, and geometric arrangements that could function as consciousness-affecting devices similar to modern biofeedback equipment or consciousness enhancement technologies. These headdresses appear to have been sophisticated tools for consciousness development rather than merely decorative items. The chemical technologies employed in Egyptian consciousness development included sophisticated preparations that affected neurotransmitter function, electromagnetic field generation, and consciousness states in ways that supported specific types of spiritual work. These preparations were formulated based on advanced understanding of how consciousness interacts with chemical and electromagnetic influences. The Blue Lotus preparations used in Egyptian spiritual practices contain compounds that affect serotonin and dopamine systems in ways that enhance dream recall, facilitate lucid dreaming, and support the consciousness projection techniques that were central to Egyptian spiritual training. Modern pharmacological analysis has confirmed that Blue Lotus contains naturally occurring compounds that produce consciousness-altering effects conducive to spiritual development work. The Kai-Fi incense formulations used in Egyptian temples contain over 20 different organic compounds that work synergistically to produce consciousness states that enhance psychic perception, facilitate spiritual communication, and support the relaxed attention states optimal for consciousness development work. The precision and effectiveness of these formulations indicate sophisticated understanding of consciousness-affecting chemistry. The oils used for spiritual anointing contain organic compounds that affect electromagnetic field generation in biological tissue and may help maintain the energetic coherence needed for consciousness development work. These oils appear to have been formulated to enhance the energy field interactions between consciousness and physical embodiment during spiritual practices. The systematic suppression of Egyptian consciousness technologies by later civilizations represents one of the most significant losses in human intellectual and spiritual development. The Roman conquest of Egypt resulted in the deliberate destruction of temple libraries and the systematic elimination of priests and priestesses who possessed advanced consciousness development knowledge. The early Christian church's campaign against Egyptian spiritual practices led to the demonization of consciousness development techniques that had been refined over thousands of years of systematic research and application. Many Egyptian practices were banned as pagan sorcery, while their underlying scientific principles were lost or forgotten. The academic establishment's treatment of Egyptian consciousness technologies as primitive religious beliefs, rather than sophisticated scientific applications, has prevented serious investigation of these technologies and their potential applications for modern consciousness development and human enhancement. The deliberate mistranslation and misinterpretation of Egyptian texts has obscured the practical nature of these consciousness technologies and presented them as mythological stories rather than technical manuals for consciousness development. This misrepresentation has deprived humanity of access to advanced understanding of human potential and consciousness development techniques. The revival of authentic Egyptian consciousness technologies could provide solutions for many problems facing modern civilization, including mental health challenges, consciousness development limitations, enhanced human capabilities for addressing complex global problems, and improved understanding of human potential and consciousness evolution. The knowledge preserved in Egyptian temple schools represents the most advanced understanding of human consciousness and spiritual development ever achieved by human civilization. This knowledge includes practical technologies for consciousness enhancement, systematic approaches to spiritual development, and comprehensive understanding of human potential that extends far beyond what mainstream culture recognizes as possible. The pharaohs and high priests who mastered these technologies achieved levels of consciousness development that enabled them to function as conscious bridges between human awareness and cosmic intelligence. Their example demonstrates that human beings possess capabilities and potentials that transcend ordinary limitations and can serve purposes that extend far beyond individual survival and gratification. The Egyptian legacy offers practical pathways for consciousness development that could transform human civilization by enhancing individual capabilities while supporting collective evolution toward greater wisdom, compassion, and harmony. The technologies developed by Egyptian consciousness researchers provide proven methods for human enhancement that have been tested through thousands of years of systematic application. Understanding the authentic nature of Egyptian consciousness technologies reveals that human beings are not limited biological machines, but sophisticated consciousness entities with multiple energy systems, expanded awareness capabilities, and evolutionary potentials that continue developing long after physical death. The Egyptian contribution to human knowledge provides practical guidance for accessing and developing these capabilities in service of both individual fulfillment and collective evolution. Part 8. Practical applications for modern life. The ancient Egyptian understanding of consciousness, death, and human potential offers profound practical applications for addressing contemporary challenges in healthcare, psychology, spiritual development, and end-of-life care. Rather than being merely historical curiosities or primitive religious beliefs, these consciousness technologies provide tested solutions for problems that modern society struggles to address through conventional approaches alone. The Egyptian insights about consciousness structure and death transition processes could revolutionize how we approach end-of-life care, grief counseling, and support for individuals and families dealing with terminal illness and bereavement. By understanding death as a natural transition rather than ultimate termination, healthcare providers and counselors can offer more comprehensive and effective support that addresses both practical needs and spiritual dimensions of the dying process.